Hello, I'm Rex Childhouse, and because things on the internet seem to lose their date references pretty quick, today is Tuesday, October 10th, 2023. On September 15th, 2023, Friday, we visited the Hill Aerospace Museum at Hill Air Force Base in Utah. Fantastic museum, very large museum, still under construction. This is part two of B part, whatever you want to call it. This is the second of the two videos to complete this tour, and this will wrap it up. This section of the video focuses on primarily on the Hill presentation of the Korean Vietnam War and the battle through the Aleutians. And because Hill Air Force Base, initially Hill Field with the Army Air Corps, played major roles, a lot of their signage, a lot of their presentation focuses on how Hill Field, later Hill Air Force Base, supported the U.S. military mission. And you'll see that as we go. This particular video was rather emotional for me for a couple of reasons. My father fought across the Aleutian Islands at the outbreak of World War II. As part of the Army, he was with an artillery unit, and can tell you about Shimea, Dutch Harbor, Attu, and a number of other locations. He died in 1984, and it brings into Vietnam, and a couple of people that I know were Vietnam POWs, and they've written several books on it. Listened to several Vietnam POWs talk about their experience, and served with quite a few people who were active in Vietnam. My military career, I joined the Marine Corps and then got transferred over to the Navy towards the end of the Vietnam War, and I went active duty about 2 weeks after the Vietnam War was officially over. So let's get on with the video. It's a emotional video for me. Thanks for watching. Hope you enjoy it. This is part two, or part B, of our visit to the Hill Air Force Base Aerospace Museum. And this is the entrance to main building. It's several buildings. They are in the process of expanding it. And this McDonnell Phantom 2, F4 Phantom 2, is the guidepost to get in. Underneath its tail, you'll see the security entrance to the base. So this is not inside the security area of the base. You don't need credentials to get on base to visit this museum. Admission is free. There is a flag circle, and this monument identifies those that have received the Medal of Honor. This Vultee BT-13 is hanging up in the overhead. As I said on the part B, or part A, the first part of this video series at Hill Air Force Base's Aerospace Museum, you need to keep looking in the overhead. There's no signage for this that I found. The museum has one of the more interesting helicopters, and I worked on one of these when I was in my A&P school. One of our fellow students, a helo pilot, Vietnam helo pilot that was coming back to get his A&P license, owned several of them. He bought them as a package deal on an auction. This came an H-43 Husky. The rotors on this are interesting because they do interlace. They're canted off to the side. Most helicopters, you have to come in from the side. This helicopter, you have to come in from the front or the back. And it did serve a number of purposes, and it was evidently a very stable aircraft in flight. There's more than aircraft here. This Dodge WC-54 3/4 ton ambulance, 1942 to 44 manufacture. They only produced 23,000 of them for the U.S. military. Used in World War II, used into Korean, and you see them on the MASH series every once in a while. It's a bare bones unit. The iconic Jeep out of World War II has numerous designations depending on who built them. Willys built some, Ford Motor Company built some, I think some other companies built them. They reached 361,339 according to this write-up. A fun vehicle, utility vehicle that did a lot of things for the U.S. military. The German V1, the buzz bomb, was the vengeance weapon of Germany, and according to the signage, launched. The first one was launched against London just after D-Day. It wasn't real accurate. It did have a basic system. What the British figured out was they could take their faster aircraft, their Spitfires and their Hurricanes, and actually catch these things in flight, and then tap their wingtip to wingtip, and the V1 would go out of control and crash. We captured one. We did reverse engineering on it according to this poster, improved it, and we're preparing to launch it against Japan, but that never happened. There are a number of engines on display. The Pratt & Whitney R985, the Wasp Jr., is one of the iconic engines. It ended up on so many airplanes and in so many different roles. They've got one of the very first jet engines, in fact the first jet engine produced in mass in the United States, the General Electric J31 turbojet, produced in mass, 241 total in 2 years of production. Weighing 850 pounds, it produced 1,650 pounds of thrust, almost 2 pounds of thrust per pound of weight, and it powered the Bell P-59 Air Comet, which wasn't a real successful airplane. This monster is a Pratt & Whitney R4650 radial engine. I didn't see any signage other than those small placards that are on the display box. This is a 28-cylinder radial engine, and supercharged, very powerful beast, but very temperamental and had massive heating problems. It did make it to several aircraft, and I believe it was on the Boeing B-50, but due to engine problems, in particular heating and oil consumption and usage for cooling, it just wasn't real successful. It just seems that every museum has one of these models, which was a training aid for mechanics, and at Southern Illinois University, where I went through A&P school, we had one too. The General Electric J79 jet engine turbojet is what was used in the F4 and a number of other supersonic aircraft. And if you look at it, on the left hand side as you see this engine, the inlet guide vanes are variable, and that was kind of unique to General Electric. Our early jet engines were centrifugal flow compressors. It was inherited from the water pumping industry because air is considered a fluid for engineering purposes. And this cutaway, and I believe this is actually taken in the Naval Air and Space Museum, National Naval Aviation, Pensacola, Florida, by A.J. Field, according to the internet. This is a cutaway, and you can see the centrifugal compressor, which is a double feed compressor on the J33 engine. Then it comes up in the diffusers, gets down in the burner cans, and then goes over to the power turbine. It's a rotating mass, and as such it's a gyroscope, and it puts tension, stress on the drive shaft, and that was one of the problems. We got better. We learned from it. The Allison J35 turbojet took us from those centrifugal flow compressors into the axial flow compressors, and as you can see by these cutaways, this became a much longer engine, but because of the way the engine was designed, it didn't have the gyroscopic effects that the centrifugal flow had. It didn't have the internal stresses. It had other issues that developed as they went along, and those were resolved to make a very efficient engine. And virtually every jet engine today is an axial flow compressor engine. Some of the turboprops use combination axial and centrifugal flow compressors. The museum did have a number of items about early aviation and aviation in World War I. In World War I, the technology really changed. A lot of the early aircraft had what was referred to as a rotary engine. In a rotary engine, they bolted the crankshaft to the airframe, and then spun the cylinders and the crankcase, which the prop was bolted to, and pretty much the only thing the pilot could control was on and off on the fuel or on and off on the ignition. It was a gyroscopic result due to the rotating mass. Then we went to the radial engine. You bolted the crankcase and the cylinders to the airframe, and the prop spun on the crankshaft, which eliminated that problem. We also went to modified motor vehicle car type engines, where we went to straight line and V engines, and either air or water cooled them. A lot of technology changed in the first 20 years of aviation. My dad was in the U.S. Army prior to the outbreak of World War II and was stationed as an artillery coordinator in Alaska with the Army, and he fought his first combat action across the Aleutian Islands and talked about islands such as Attu, Shemia, the area of Dutch Harbor, and so on. And the Hill Aerospace Museum has these several panels associated with the battle in the Aleutians and how it went and where it went, and in particular how we recovered a Japanese Zero and brought it down to Naval Air Station North Island here in San Diego, repaired it, flew it, and discovered the Zero strong points, weak points, and modified our aircraft in accordance with those discoveries, and modified our tactics as well. A terror weapon used by the Japanese for these Fugo balloons, which carried bombs and incendiaries, and they were launched in Japan, basically made of paper and glue, with the intent that they followed the trade winds. I don't have a picture of a cutaway J-33 jet stream J-33 up in North America on display coming at down the Pima Aerospace Museum in Tucson. It's in front of a Lockheed F-80 shooting star, but it was the engine that powered that aircraft. Also addressed as the Lend-Lease program, and it explains how a lot of the aircraft inlet to the compressor to Russia. Air comes in from both sides. They flew it a much shorter engine, but that spinning compressor into Alaska was a gyroscope time, turned it over and to the Soviet had problems as the aircraft maneuvered, and then they gyroscope wanted to stay stationary Siberia, and into the drive shaft between them flexed into the Russian Air Force, and they would occasionally fail. Military aircraft were transferred under the Lend-Lease program. We would later fight them. And construction of the Alcan Highway, the Alaskan Highway, going through Canada and into Alaska. You can pause and read this. They went through horrendous weather conditions, fighting the tundra, fighting the weather, whatever else. One of my aunt's husbands was a worker on this, and when he would talk about it, he would talk about mosquitoes and flies and standing in place for 2 minutes and sinking 6 inches into the ground. At the very end of the Aleutian Islands, there's another island chain, the Kamendorsky Islands, and this particular panel talks about a battle there between light cruisers and heavy cruisers of the Japanese and U.S. Navy, and one of the vessels in the battle was the Salt Lake City cruiser, and it was listed as the longest contiguous gunnery duel in modern naval history. So Hill Field is being developed to support the war, the Army Air Corps at the time, and they are tasked to modify some aircraft to adapt them to the cold weather of Alaska, and then ship them off to Alaska and support the Alaskan and Aleutian campaigns. And Utah has a very severe winter. If you look at the top photo over here, this is some A-26 Invaders that are buried in snow to the bottom of their wings. So this was deep, it was cold. The consolidated B-24 Liberator that's on display was recovered from the Aleutian Islands and restored, and it was done recently, and you can read the bio on this. It was recently recovered, restored, and this series of panels talks about how women were essential to the war effort, and I'll let you read those as you will. My mother was away from 1943 to 1945, stationed in D.C. The Hill Aerospace Museum has several panels addressing the Korean War, and I'm going to let you kind of breeze through some of them. I'm going to highlight a couple as we go. On the very first panel, it looks like a A-26 Invader dropping bombs. Hill Air Force Base, the museum, the Aerospace Museum, focuses quite a bit on what the Air Force Base itself, or Hill Airfield, Hill Field before the Air Force in 1947 was created. So you'll see a lot of references on the panels about specifically what they did and how they did it. The Korean War, as the panels stress, was a true transition war, and that transition was from the prop and no helicopter age into a prop, jet, and helicopter age war. And there's numerous panels that are showing it, and you can see how some of the World War II aircraft were updated, modified, repaired, restored from storage from the 5 years or so after World War II into Korea to play another role. In this last slide on the Korean War, life at Hill Air Force Base 1950 to 1953, look at the lower left photo. It's the Convair XC-99, which was the largest aircraft in the world. It was based on another Convair design, and only one was built. I need to see if I actually have photos of it. Because Hill Air Force Base and the citizens of the state of Utah played a role in Vietnam, there are a number of panels regarding the Vietnam War and a lot of information about the Vietnam War. And it starts with these chronological panels going back to 1962 and incrementing their way up to 1973. You can stop the YouTube video and view them, and it talks about continues on into the deployment of U.S. forces into Vietnam. I'm going to address a slightly political issue because I was in high school and in college during the Vietnam War. I joined the United States Navy, took the oath to go into aviation officer candidate school. Actually took the oath to be a Marine candidate, and then got transferred over to the Navy during the Vietnam War. It was not Nixon's war. The war started before Nixon became president. Because Hill Air Force Base and the citizens of the state of Utah played a role in Vietnam, there are a number of panels regarding the Vietnam War and a lot of information about the Vietnam War. And it starts with these chronological panels going back to 1962 and incrementing their way up to 1973. You can stop the YouTube video and view them, and it talks about continues on into the deployment of U.S. forces into Vietnam. I'm going to address a slightly political issue because I was in high school and in college during the Vietnam War. I joined the United States Navy, took the oath to go into aviation officer candidate school. Actually took the oath to be a Marine candidate, and then got transferred over to the Navy during the Vietnam War. It was not Nixon's war. The war started before Nixon became president. Numerous aircraft involved in the combat, and some in their original role, fighters acting as fighters, some in modified roles, fighters being converted into close support or air-to-mud missions, air-to-ground missions. And the toll of the war on aircraft required a maintenance facility, and Hill Air Force Base was a maintenance facility for the war. Numerous aircraft that are on display in the museum had their type involved in Vietnam, and the forward air controllers flew the Bird Dogs and the Super Skymasters as forward air controllers, close air support aircraft. One of the critical missions that did evolve through this process was the use of helicopters and this started in Korea. The use of helicopters for search and rescue and recovery of downed airmen and medevac units. And there's a number of these panels that talk about the search and rescue missions and who flew them and how they flew them. With an air war such as Vietnam, with numerous aircraft from both sides meeting, there were sorties, referred to as sorties flights, and there were victories and there were losses, and they are documented in several museums, including Hill Aerospace's museum. The ground war involved two sides supporting North Vietnam: the Viet Cong, which was the guerrilla armament, the guerrilla warfare element in South Vietnam, and the North Vietnamese army, which infiltrated Vietnam as well. That gave us a situation where in war prisoners are taken, and the Aerospace Museum had an excellent presentation of the prisoner of war issue in Vietnam, and there's numerous panels. They're shown here. There are several great books written on the prisoner of war scenario of Vietnam. Two good books, and there's many, as I said, about the POW issue in Vietnam. One is In Love and War by Jim and Sybil Stockdale. Jim Stockdale retired as an admiral. I heard a presentation from him, I believe it was at North Island Naval Air Station. And another book, Patriot Prisoner Survivor by Henry James, better known as Jim Bettinger. Both excellent books on the POW experience in North Vietnam, written by the people that were there. So President Nixon with Secretary of State Henry Kissinger negotiate an end in the Paris Treaty talks, and we pull out of South Vietnam, render support for it as long as we can, and South Vietnam finally falls, and now it's a unified country. So ends the war. It was an issue in American history that will be debated for many, many years. When I started this video, I didn't know this video series. I didn't know how many it was going to take. It's going to take two, so I have an A and a B. We spent, if I go by memory, probably 4 or 5 hours in the museum. It was rather emotional. It is an excellent museum. It is free admission, free parking. You don't have to pass the security points of Hill Air Force Base. Come in from, there's directions on how to get into it, and it is under construction, being improved, being enhanced, being enlarged. In particular, the Vietnam POW, Vietnam War presentation, which was very thorough, very effective, and I kind of glazed through it, was a very emotional event because I joined the U.S. Marine Corps and then ended up in the United States Navy, and that's where I did my career, flying off aircraft carriers and living in Japan for 5.5 years, Philippines for 2, the Saudi Desert for 1. And this museum struck a very emotional issue with me, and it's a fantastic museum, well worth the time.